Book 3, Chapter 18 of Strangers and Pilgrims by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Strangers and Pilgrims, Book 3, Chapter 18. Now 3 years since, this had not seemed so good an end for me, but in some wise all things wear round betimes, and wind up well. Elizabeth has been nearly 5 months a widow. It is the end of July. She is at Penarthur, a little Cornish town by the sea, at the extreme western point of the land, a sheltered nook where the climate is almost as mild as the south of France, where myrtles climb over all the cottages, and roses blossom among the very chimney-pots, where the sea has the hues of a fine opal or a peacock's breast, for ever changing from blue to green. Penarthur is a combination of market town and a fashionable watering place. The town, with its narrow high street and bank and post office and market and busy-looking commercial inn, lying a little inland, the fashionable district consisting of a row of white-walled houses and one huge many-balconied hotel, 6 stories high, facing the Atlantic Ocean. Among the white houses, there is one a little better than the rest, standing alone in a small garden, a garden full of roses and carnations, mignonette and sweet peas, and here they have brought Elizabeth. They are all with her, Gertrude, Diana, and Blanche. Anne, the old vicarage nurse, who has left her comfortable retirement at Hawleigh to wait upon her darling, and Malcolm Forde, who lodges in a cottage near at hand, but who spends all his days with Elizabeth, for whom alone he seems to live in those bitter-sweet hours of close companionship, with Elizabeth, who is never to be his wife. God has restored her reason, but across the path that might have been so fair and free for these two to tread together, there has crept the darkness of a shadow which forebodes the end of earthly hope. He has her all to himself in these soft summer days, in this quiet haven by the sea. No touch of pride, no thought of conflicting duty to divide them. But he knows full surely that he will have her only for a little while, that the sweet eyes which look at him with love unspeakable are slowly, slowly fading, that the oval cheek, whose wasting line the drooping hair disguises, is growing more hollow day by day, that nothing love or science can do, and he has well nigh exhausted the resources of both in her service, can delay their parting. Not upon this earth is he to reap the harvest of his labours, not in earthly happiness is he to find the fruition of his faith. The darkest hour of his life lies before him, and he knows it, sees the bolt ready to descend, and has to smile and be cheerful, and beguile his dear one with an aspect of unchanging serenity, lest by any betrayal of his grief he should shorten the brief span in which they may yet be together. Physicians, the greatest in the land, have done their utmost. She had lived too fast. That short reign of splendour in Park Lane, perpetual excitement, unceasing fatigue, unflagging high spirits, or the appearance of high spirits, the wild grief that had followed her baby's death, the vain regrets that had racked her soul even in the midst of her brilliant career, the excitement and fever of an existence which was meant to be all pleasure, these were among the causes of her decline. There had been a complete exhaustion of vitality, though the amount of vitality had been exceptional, the ruin of a superb constitution, worn out untimely by sheer ill-usage. "Men drink themselves to death very often," said one of the doctors to Malcolm Forde, "and women just as often wear themselves to death. This lovely young woman has worn out a constitution which ought to have lasted till she was 80. Very sad. A complete decline of vital force. The cough we might get over, patch up the lungs, or make the heart do their work, but the whole organisation is worn out." Mr. Forde had questioned them as to the possible advantages of change of climate. He was ready to carry her to the other end of the world if hope beckoned him. "If she should live till October, you might take her to Madeira," said his counsellor, "though this climate is almost as good. The voyage might be beneficial, or might not. With so delicate an organisation to deal with, one can hardly tell." That disease which is of all maladies the most delusive allowed Elizabeth many hours of ease and even hopefulness. She did not see the fatal shadow that walked by her side. Never had the world seemed so fair to her, or life so sweet. The only creature she had ever deeply loved was restored to her. A happy future waited for her. Her intervals of bodily suffering she regarded as an ordeal through which she must pass patiently, always cheered by that bright vision of the days to come when she was to be Malcolm's helpmeet and fellow worker. The pain and weariness were hard to bear sometimes, but she bore them heroically, as only a tiresome detail in the great business of getting well, and after a night of fever and sleeplessness would greet Malcolm's morning visit with a smile full of hope and love. She was very fond of talking to him of their future, the strange world she was to see, the curious childlike people whose little children she was to teach. Funny coloured children, with eyes blacker than the sloes in the Devonshire lanes, and flashing white teeth. Children who would touch her white raiment with inquisitive little paws, and think her a goddess, and wonder why she did not spread her wings and soar away to the blue sky. Her brain was singularly active. The apathy which had been a distinguishing mark of her mental disorder a few months ago, which had even continued for some time after she had left Hetheridge Hall, had now given place to all the old vivacity. She was full of schemes and fancies about that bright future, planned every room in the one-storey house, bungalow-shaped, which Malcolm was to build for her, was never tired of hearing him describe those sunny islands in the southern sea. They had been talking of these things one sultry afternoon, in a favourite spot of Elizabeth's, a little curve of the shore where there was a smooth stretch of sand, sheltered by a screen of rocks. She could not walk so far, but was brought here in a bath-chair, and sometimes, when weakest, reclined here on a couch made of carriage rugs and air-pillows. This afternoon they were alone. The three sisters had gone off on a pilgrimage to Mordred Castle, and had left them to the delight of each other's company. "Oh, how nice it is to be with you like this," Elizabeth said softly, putting a wasted little hand into Malcolm's broad palm, a hand which seemed smaller to him every time he clasped it. "I wish there were more castles for the others to see, only that sounds ungrateful when they're so good to me. Do you know, Malcolm, I lie awake at night often. The cough keeps me awake a good deal, but it would be all the same if I had no cough. I lie and wonder at our happiness, wonder to think that God has given me all I ever desired, even now after I played fast and loose with my treasure and seemed to lose it utterly. I hope I'm not glad of poor Reginald's death. He was always very good to me, you know, in his way, and I was not at all good to him in my way. But I can't help being happy, even now, before the blackness has worn off my first mourning. It seems dreadful for a woman in widow's weeds to be so happy and planning a new life. But it is only going backwards. Oh, Malcolm, why were you so hard upon me that day? Think how many years of happiness we have lost." He was sitting on the ground by the side of her heaped-up pillows, but with his back almost turned upon her bed, his eyes looking seaward, haggard and tearless. "You might as well answer me, Malcolm, but I suppose you do think me very wicked. Only remember, it was you who first spoke of our new life together." "My darling, can I do anything but love you to distraction?" he said in utter helplessness. The hour would come, alas, too soon, in which he must tell her the bitter truth, that on earth there was no such future for those two as the future she dreamed of, that her pilgrimage must end untimely, leaving him to tread his darkened path alone, verily a stranger and pilgrim, with no abiding city, with nothing but the promise of a home on the farther shore of Death's chill river. Would he meet her in that distant land? Oh, yes, with all his heart and mind he believed in such a meeting. That he should see her as he saw her to-day, yet more lovely. That he would enter upon a new life, reunited with all he had loved on earth, united by a more spiritual communion, held together in heavenly bondage as fellow subjects and servants of his Master. But even with this assurance it was hard to part. Man's earth-born nature clung to the hope of earthly bliss, to keep her with him here, now, for a few years. The chalice of eternal bliss was hardly sweet enough to set against the bitterness of this present loss. He must tell her, and very soon. They had often talked together of serious things during these summer days by the sea, talked long and earnestly, and Elizabeth's mind, which had once been so careless of great subjects, had assumed a gentle gravity, a spirituality that filled her lover with thankfulness and joy. But pure as he knew her soul to be, almost childlike in her unquestioning faith, full of penitence for the manifold errors of her short life, he dared not leave her in ignorance of the swift coming change, dared not let her slip out of life unawares like an infant that dies in its mother's arms. Should he tell her now, here in this sweet sunny loneliness, by this untroubled sea, calm as that sea of glass before the great white throne? The hot passionate tears welled up to his eyes at the very thought. How should he shape the words that should break her happy dream? "Malcolm, what makes you so quiet this afternoon?" she asked, lifting herself a little on her pillows in the endeavour to see his face, which he still kept steadily towards the sea. "Are you beginning to change your mind about me? Are you sorry you promised to take me abroad with you, to make me a kind of junior partner in your work? You used to talk of our future with such enthusiasm, and now it's only I who go babbling on, and you sit silent, staring at the sea-gulls, till I'm startled all at once by the sound of my own voice in the utter stillness. Have you changed your mind, Malcolm? Don't be afraid to tell me the truth, because I love you far too well to be a hindrance to you. Perhaps you have reflected, and have begun to think it would be troublesome to have a wife with you in your new mission." "My dearest," he said, turning to her at last, and holding her in his arms, her tired head lying upon his shoulder. "My dearest, I never cherished so sweet a hope as the hope of spending all my future life with you. But God seldom gives a man that very blessing he longs for above all other things. It may be that it is not well for a man to say, 'Upon that one object I set all my earthly hope.' Our life here is only a journey. We have no right to desire it should be a paradise. It is not an inn, but a hospital. Darling, God has been very good to us in uniting us like this, even for a little while." "For a little while?" she cried with a frightened look. "Then you do mean to leave me?" "Oh, never, dear love. I will never leave you." "Why do you frighten me then by talking like that? Why do you let me build upon our future, till I can almost see the tropical trees and flowers, and the very house we are to live in, and then say that we are only to be together for a little while?" "If you were to be called away, Elizabeth, to a brighter world than that you dream of, leaving me to finish my pilgrimage alone. It has been too sweet a dream, dearest. I gave my life to labour, and not to such supreme happiness. And now they tell me I am not to take you with me yonder. I am to have no such sweet companionship, only the memory of your love, and bitter lifelong regret." At this he broke down utterly, and could speak no further word, but still strove desperately to stifle his sobs, to hide his agony from those fond questioning eyes. "You mean that I am going to die?" she said very slowly, in a curious wondering tone. The doctors have told you that. Oh, Malcolm, I am so sorry for you, and for myself too. We should have been so happy. For I think I am cured of all my old faults, and should have gone on growing better for your sake. And I meant to be very good, Malcolm, never to be tired of trying to do good, so that some day you might have been almost proud of me, might have looked back upon this time and said, after all, I did not do an utterly foolish thing in letting her love me. Might have been, should have been, the words smote him to the heart. "Oh, my love," he cried, "live, live for my sake. Defy your doctors, and get well for my sake. We will not accept their doom. They have been false prophets before now. Prove them false again. Come back to life and health for my sake." She gave a little feeble sigh, looking at him pityingly with the too brilliant eyes. "No," she said, "I am afraid they are right this time. I have wondered a good deal to find that getting well was such a painful business. I am afraid they are right, Malcolm, and you will begin your new mission alone. It is better, perhaps, for all intents and purposes, except just a little frivolous happiness, which you can do without. You will have your great work still, God's blessing and the praise of good men. What have I been in your life? Oh, all the world to me, darling, all my world of earthly hope. Elizabeth," in a voice that trembled ever so little, "I have told you this because I thought it my duty. It was not right that you alone should be ignorant of our fears, that if that last great change were at hand, you should be in the smallest measure unprepared to meet it. But I do not despair. Oh, no, darling. Our God may have pity upon us even yet, may grant our human wishes, and give us a few short years to spend together." "Strangers and pilgrims," she said in a thoughtful voice. "Pilgrims who have no abiding city. I was very foolish to think so much of our new life in a new world. The world where we shall meet is older than the stars." End of Book 3, Chapter 18. Book 3, Chapter 19 of Strangers and Pilgrims by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Strangers and Pilgrims, Book 3, Chapter 19. But dead? All's done with. Wait who may, watch and wear and wonder who will. Oh, my whole life that ends to-day. Oh, my soul's sentence sounding still. The woman is dead that was none of his, and the man that was none of hers may go. No gloomy forebodings, no selfish repinings ever fell from the lips of Elizabeth after that sad day by the sea. A gentle thoughtfulness, a sweet serenity lent a mournful charm to her manner, and spiritualized her beauty. She was only sorry for him, for that faithful lover from whose side relentless death too soon must call her away. Her own regrets had been of the briefest. These few summer months spent wholly with Malcolm Forde, in so perfect and complete a union, held enough happiness for a common lifetime. It cannot matter very much if one spreads one's life over years or squanders it in a summer, she said with her old smile, so long as one lives. I don't suppose all the rest of Cleopatra's jewels ever gave her half so much pleasure as that one pearl she melted in vinegar. And if I had been with you for 20 summers, Malcolm, could we ever have had a happier one than this? We have been very happy, darling. And if God spares you, we may have many another summer as sweet as this. But you know that will not be. Oh, Malcolm, don't try to deceive me with false hopes, for fear you should end by deceiving yourself. Let us make the best of our brief span, without a thought beyond the present, except such thoughts as you will teach me, my education for heaven." The time came, alas, how swiftly, when it would have been too bitter a mockery to speak of earthly hope, when these two, living to themselves alone, as if unconscious of an external world, and those about them, knew that the end was very near. The shadow hovered ever at her side. At any moment, like a sudden cloud that drifts across the sunlight, death's mystic veil might fall upon the face Malcolm Forde loved, and leave them side by side, yet worlds asunder. She was very patient, enduring pain and weakness with a gentle heroism that touched all around her. "It is not much to suffer pain," she said one day when Malcolm had praised her patience. "Lying here in the air and sunshine with my hand in yours, after what I suffered last winter, in silence and solitude, with cruel jailers who dragged me about with their rough hands, and with my mind full of confused thoughts of you, thinking you were near me, and in the next moment you would appear and rescue me, and yet with a half consciousness of that being only a dream, and you far away. It seems very little to bear, this labouring breath and this hacking cough, after that." All his life was given up to her service, reading to her, talking to her, watching her fitful slumbers, for as she grew weaker her nights became still more wakeful, and she dozed at intervals through the day. All his reading was from one inspired volume. He had offered to read other things, lest she should weary of those divine pages, but she refused. "I was not always religiously disposed," she said, "but in my most degenerate days I always felt the sublimity of the Bible." At her special request he read her all the epistles of St. Paul, lingering upon particular chapters, she, in her stronger moments, questioning him earnestly about the great apostle. "Do you know why my mind dwells so much upon St. Paul?" she asked him one day. "Oh, there are 100 reasons for your admiration of one who was only second to his divine master." "Oh yes, I have always appreciated his greatness in thought and deed. Only there was another reason for my admiration, his likeness to you." "Elizabeth!" with a warning look, an old look which she remembered in the holy days when his worshippers had all confessed to being more or less afraid of him. "Oh, is it wrong to make such a comparison? After all, you know, St. Paul was a human being before he was a saint. His fearlessness, his untiring energy, his exultant spirit, so strong in direst extremity, so great in the hour of peril, all remind me of you, or of what you seem to me at Hawleigh. And you will go on in the same road, Malcolm, when I am no longer a stumbling block and a hindrance in your way. You will go on, rejoicing through good and evil, with the great end always before you, like that first apostle of the Gentiles, whose strong right arm broke down the walls of heathendom. And I, if there were any thought or feeling in the grave, I should be so proud of having once been loved by you." "Malcolm, I have a good deal of money, have I not?" she asked him one day. "Aunt Chevenix told me I was left very well off, although Lord Paulyn died without a will. I was to have a third of his personal property, or something like that." "Yes, dearest." "And does that come to very much?" "Oh, about £70,000. 70,000?" she repeated, opening her eyes very wide. "And to think how poor papa used to grumble about writing a cheque for £4 or £5. Oh, I wish I could have had a little of my 70,000 advanced to me then. Ought I not to make a will, Malcolm?" "Oh, it seems to me hardly necessary. Your sisters are your natural heirs, and they are the only people who would inherit." "They would have all my money, then?" "Among them, yes." She made no farther inquiries, and he was glad to change the drift of their talk. But when he came at his usual hour next morning, he met a little man in black, attended by an overgrown youth with a blue bag, on the doorstep, and on the point of departing. "Congratulate me on my business-like habits, Malcolm," Elizabeth said, smiling at him from her sofa by the window. "I have just made my will." "My dearest, why trouble yourself to do that, when we'd already settled that no will was necessary?" he said, seating himself in the chair beside her pillows, a chair which was kept sacred to his use, the sisters yielding him the right to be nearest to her always at this time. "I had not settled anything of the kind. 70,000 would have been a great deal too much for my sisters. It would have turned their heads. I have left them 30,000 in, what do you call those things? Consols. A sure 300 a year for each of them, the lawyer says. And I have left 5,000 to Hilda Disney, whom I always detested, but who has next to nothing of her own, poor creature. And the rest I've left to you, for your mission, Malcolm." He bent down to kiss the pale forehead, but words were slow to come. "Let this be as you wish, dearest," he said at last. "I need no such remembrance of you, but it will be my proudest labour to raise a fitting memorial of your love. In every one of those islands I have told you about, God granting me life to complete the task, there shall be an English church dedicated to Saint Elizabeth. Your name shall sound sweet in the ears of my proselytes at the farther end of the world." The end came soon after this. A sultry twilight, faint stars far apart in a cloudless opal sky, the last splendour of the sunset fading slowly along the edge of the western sea line. She was lying in her favourite spot by the open window, her sisters grouped at one end of the sofa, Malcolm in his place at the other, his strong arm supporting her, his shoulder the pillow for her tired head. "Malcolm, do you remember the day of our picnic at Lawborough Beeches? Centuries ago it seems to me." "Have I ever forgotten any day or hour we spent together? Yes, dear, I remember perfectly." "And how we went down the Tabor in that big clumsy old boat, and you told me the story of your first love?" "Yes, dear, I remember." "You could never have guessed what a wicked creature I was that day. But you did think me ill-tempered, didn't you?" "I feared I had grieved or offended you." "Oh, it was not temper or grief or anything of the kind. It was sheer wickedness, wicked jealousy of that good girl who died. I envied her, Malcolm, envied her the joy of dying in your arms." No answer save a passionate kiss on the cold forehead. "I did not think it would be my turn one day," she went on slowly, looking up at him with those lovely eyes clouded by death's awful shadow. "I did not think that these dear arms would hold me too in life's last hour, that the last earthly sight my fading eyes should see would be the eyes I love. Oh no, Malcolm, no, not with that look of pain. I am quite happy." End of Book 3, Chapter 19. End of Strangers and Pilgrims by Mary Elizabeth Braddon.